Apple goes to extraordinary lengths to keep data about its impending items from spilling before their authority discharge. Numerous organizations do this as well, however Apple has more noteworthy motivations too. It is perhaps the most replicated organizations on the planet, and steady breaks could hurt its accounts and give its opponents and copycats an edge, as Apple has discovered. Nonetheless, it is hard to stay quiet about things, especially when you are a trillion-dollar organization with over 100,000 workers. Everybody from the media to fans and financial backers are constantly keen on whatever you are chipping away at and will effectively get that data. It enlists computerized legal organizations to uncover leakers. Apple's workers are partial to spilling organization data to the press. This pattern is normal to such an extent that a reminder cautioning workers against spilling organization data to the press was spilled to the press. The subtleties of another gathering where chiefs pondered on the best way to get leakers was spilled too. 1. In reaction, Apple invests extraordinary amounts of energy into uncovering leakers. It even gotten the administrations of computerized measurable organizations like Global Security to follow spilled organization records back to the source. So far, Global Security has uncovered a few Apple workers who spilled data about unreleased items to the press. It additionally works with Apple's providers to follow leakers alongside the individuals who acquired unapproved passage into confined zones or took licenses, models and finished items. It finds its providers. A couple of years prior, a sapphire glassmaker called GT Advanced failed. The organization before long recorded charges against Apple in the midst of cases. A $50 million fine Apple forced on it added to its destruction. We don't have the foggiest idea about the unequivocal subtleties of the fine in light of the fact that the two organizations consented to a non-divulgence arrangement. In any case, from the restricted subtleties GT's lawyers introduced in court, we realize Apple fined the organization for spilling data about the unreleased iPhone 6. GT's attorneys depicted the arrangement among Apple and GT as abusive and burdensome. According to reports, Apple consistently fines its providers for spills followed back to their offices. The providers can't decline to pay since it is essential for the conditions recorded in their contracts. 3. Apple and GT later consented to a $3.5 million settlement. It utilizes code names for its unreleased items. Apple utilizes code names for every one of its models and unreleased items. That way, nobody will have a thought of what the item is about regardless of whether the codename leaked. For model, the Apple Watch was codenamed Gizmo, Mac OS was codenamed Systems and the iPhone was codenamed Purple. The iPhone was created in a devoted lockdown room, we will return to this soon, codenamed the Purple Dormitory. Representatives working there clung to severe guidelines, like always failing to discuss the model iPhone outside the room. The 1994 Power Macintosh 7100 PC was codenamed after space expert Carl Sagan, who was neutral when he discovered. Apple reacted by renaming it Butt-Headed Astronomer. Sagan documented charges, first against the butt-headed astronomer codename and later, the Carl Sagan codename. He lost both. He and Apple later agreed to codename the PC Law, which implies lawyers are wimps. The disputable naming show was stretched out to the Mac OS 7.5, which was likewise scheduled for discharge in 1994. It was initially codenamed Mozart yet changed to Capone after Apple found Windows had codenamed its impending Windows 95, Chicago. Apple's name was a quip on the scandalous Al Capone, who once governed over the Chicago crime location. It utilizes previous knowledge specialists to get unreleased items. Apple's various providers are its most fragile connections. Their workers are notorious for releasing unreleased items to the press. One of Apple's most noticeably awful breaks happened a couple of years prior when a worker of a Chinese provider called Jabal took a great many housings of the unreleased iPhone 5C and spilled it to the press. Apple reacted by gathering a group of previous American troopers and insight specialists to screen its Chinese providers. It considered them the New Product Security Team (NPS). Each individual from the group got Chinese, so language was no barrier. The New Product Security Team had unhindered admittance to providers' processing plants where they reviewed their inventories and checked the rubbish to affirm no material was absent. The group was generally fruitful. On one event, they even got a few specialists who had borrowed a passage to carry Apple's items out of the manufacturing plant of an anonymous provider. It takes steps to end contracts. Apple has an extensive rundown of things it could do to providers and project workers that release its unreleased items. It could fine them, record charges, or in outrageous cases, end their agreement, regardless of whether it just speculates them of being liable for the leak. This has made numerous Apple project workers like Foxconn, what collects iPhones, to transform their offices into current forts. Foxconn workers can just access the plant with security cards, after which watchers cross-check their character with unique mark scanners. Watchers additionally utilize metal indicators to look through them before they leave the facility. Apple's workers for hire pay attention to their security so that monitors at a Foxconn manufacturing plant in Longhua, China, beat up and pestered a Reuters columnist for taking photographs of the office from the road. The badgering possibly finished when the journalist called the police. The correspondent understood a statement of regret was all he would get after a cop advised him, "You are allowed to do what you need, however this is Foxconn and they have an extraordinary status here." The columnist didn't document charges. It assembles lockdown rooms. On the off chance that you think Apple is severe with its providers and workers for hire, stand by until you know how it treats its own representatives. Like workers for hire, most Apple representatives are uninformed about Apple's unreleased items. They are just determined what they need to know, when they need to know it. Every worker realizes something is in progress when they see a woodworker stroll into their office. Nonetheless, with regards to Apple's approaches, they don't pose inquiries since they realize somebody would have addressed them in the event that it were their business. The craftsmen before long set up austere rooms that are simply open to approved faculty. Apple calls these rooms lockdown rooms. They are the origination of most items and administrations created by Apple. Employees outside an office possibly find the presence of a lockdown room when their entrance identifications quit giving them admittance to specific rooms and workplaces. The rest don't have the foggiest idea what's going on and are regularly, however, amazed as we seem to be when Apple unexpectedly delivers another item. It protects its models with bike chains. Macintosh built up the iPad in one of the austere lockdown rooms we discussed in the past passage. As indicated by a designer who composed code for the iPad, he was the sixth individual to contact the unreleased iPad and one of the four individuals permitted into the lockdown room containing the model iPads. Apple constructed outlines round the tablets so the engineers couldn't perceive what they resembled. They couldn't move the tablets either on the grounds that Apple protected them to the table with bike chains. Mac took photographs of all aspects of the table containing an iPad so they could follow spilled pictures by contrasting the examples of the wood grains. The designer added that Apple brought down the names and government-managed retirement quantities of everybody working in the room. They were expressly illegal from conversing with anybody about the iPad. That incorporates their chief and spouse. It made outsider engineers consent to non-divulgence arrangements. Each Apple representative is needed to consent to a non-divulgence arrangement simply like workers at each other significant tech organization out there. Notwithstanding, Apple got into the news for some unacceptable reasons a couple of years prior when it asked outsider designers building applications for the App Store to sign non-exposure agreements. Apple had quite recently opened the App Store to outsider engineers at that point, and it was concerned they may release classified insider facts that might be useful to its rivals. The agreement restricted engineers from uncovering the subtleties of the applications they were chipping away at, or regardless of whether their application was dismissed from the store. The contract was disputable at the time in light of the fact that the designers were not Apple workers and enjoyed telling their local area about their most recent ventures. The engineers broadly censured the understanding, making Apple suspend it half a month later. It constructed a representative just cafe. Apple will go to any length to keep its representatives from spilling secret data regardless of whether means isolating them from the general population. This was what occurred in 2012, when it fabricated a restrictive cafe for representatives at its previous central command in Cupertino, California. Apple had an eatery inside its Cupertino office at that point. Be that as it may, it was available to guests on the condition they were with a worker. As it ended up, the presence of a worker was adequately not to discourage Apple's feelings of trepidation that rival organizations and writers may visit to snoop on discussions. So it constructed a subsequent cafe to solely serve its representatives.